Well, hello everyone. Welcome to another live stream on the History of Life podcast. And today I'm joined by Reverend Dr. Keith Mascord. He's a retired theologian and philosopher. Today's live stream will be based on his book titled An Honest Faith, The Possible Friendship of Athens and Jerusalem, the link in which will be provided in the description below and in the pinned comment if you wish to purchase a copy of the book. That being said, Keith, welcome to the History of Life podcast, and thank you for joining me today.
Yeah, thank you very much, Jacob. It's a privilege to be here. Yeah.
Thank you for joining me. Can you tell the audience a little bit more about yourself?
So, how do you summarize 72 years? But I'm Canadian born, of an Australian father and a Canadian mother who met during World War II. I've grown up in a winningly beautiful and supportive and loving fundamentalist home initially in Canada and then in Australia. And I've been in this country, Australia, for since I was 11. And I guess the whole of my life, I've been encouraged by my dad, who was a questioner, to keep questioning the heritage from which I've come. And so towards the end of my working life, and I've had 5 careers as a teacher, a priest, an academic, a chaplain, a parole officer, maybe you could add another one, kind of supervising the New South Wales Multi-Faith Prison Chaplaincy Service. Throughout all that time, my journey of faith has continued at pace in some ways. And I'm now retired, have written 3 books, and collectively I've written 4 books, the first of which was my doctoral thesis on the American philosopher Alvin Plantinga. But the next 3, taken together, kind of represent and chronicle to some degree a faith journey. So the first book was A Restless Faith, Leaving Fundamentalism in a Quest for God. Second book, Faith Without Fear, Risky Choices Facing Contemporary Christians. And then this one that you've mentioned, Jacob, An Honest Faith, The Possible Friendship of Athens and Jerusalem. So that's in it enough in a nutshell.
What is this book about? An Honest Faith, The Possible Friendship of Athens and Jerusalem.
The book is divided into 2 unequal parts. The first I introduce as a deconstruction. So it kind of looks at what I think are the most serious and challenging challenges to traditional Christian faith, certainly to the fundamentalism of my youth, and including evangelicalism. So I guess it is an exercise in deconstruction. But then the second half of the book is my effort at reconstruction, like what might a Christian faith look like that takes account not only of these challenges, but of new information that's always coming before us in terms of biblical studies, in terms of the history of the Jewish nation, as a result of information that's been around for a long time, such as evolutionary theory. And so it really tells my story, not in any sense coercive, but also to encourage people who may think that Christian faith is no longer possible with integrity. So that's it. And so because in my academic phase of my life, I was teaching philosophy and apologetics and pastoral ministry, I kind of draw upon that love of philosophy to say, is philosophy, and especially in its questing and questioning nature, compatible with Christian faith? And I argue that not only are they compatible, that Athens, or philosophy, and you could include science, is important to having a well-informed Christian faith, and also to prevent faith from kind of collapsing into cult or sect.
What do you make of the biblical hermeneutics and the implications uh, regarding that?
Hermeneutics, I think, is absolutely the key. In other words, how you read and understand any text. And my dad, who was, although fundamentalistic in his beliefs, was also, as I said, willing to question. But his hermeneutic is fairly simple, actually, and I think it's not atypical amongst many Christians. And his hermeneutic was kind of this, that if something in the Bible can be read as fact, as straightforwardly fact, and isn't obviously metaphor, parable, or symbolism, then he would take it that way. Now, I don't think he was totally consistent, because in time he became open to evolution. So it became harder to be able to reconcile evolutionary theory with a literalistic reading of the early chapters. But that was his approach. And under the influence of Martin Luther, a lot of Christians have taken up that way of reading the scripture. So it's just, you just take what's there as factual without any sort of critical kind of questions as to, what is the nature of the genre? Is this mythical? Is it legendary? And for myself, I've been helped by Paul Ricoeur and his kind of threefold hermeneutical arc. First, naivety, critical engagement, and second, naivety, where after doing all your critical work, you then say, well, what can I take from this passage for life in today's world and in my world? But I just see, just the last point, I just see that so many Christians, so many denominations right across the Christian world do not read the Bible with sufficient sophistication in terms of what it actually is as text.
What do you make of the love and womanhood in regards to the Bible, or the different denominations like Roman Catholic or Orthodox? What is your take on that?
A take on women and love and womanhood, you mean?
Yeah, regarding the different denominations between Roman Catholic and Orthodox that you talk about in the book.
Okay. Sure. Well, it's kind of, for me, this is kind of one of the things that precipitated my own kind of developing faith journey and the quest for a better way of reading the scriptures, because as I do say in the book, Roman Catholic, Orthodox, and most Protestant churches and denominations do not accept the leadership of women within the church. So to me, that's kind of a scandal, and it, there's reason to think early on in the Christian story, women did exercise leadership within Christian congregations, but patriarchy quickly kind of stamped that out, and quite possibly the pastoral epistles, almost certainly not written by St. Paul, who could well have been a patriarchal pushback against a more egalitarian kind of a more egalitarian version of Christianity. But I guess, common sense, in my case, kind of was decisive. When I was teaching at more theological college, quite conservative, but reasonably kind of scholarly sensitive seminary in Sydney, as head of the ministry department at one stage, we would have, students would have student sermons, and time again, the best preachers and the most capable preachers were women. So it kind of created one of those cases where cognitive dissonance sets in, and we had recently in Australia a female prime minister, female leaders right across the world, Jacinda Ardern in New Zealand, incredibly able leaders and able to exercise leadership in wonderful ways. And so the church it just seemed increasingly odd, silly, and in today's world, almost scandalous that women would be prevented from preaching in many cases, but also being priests and bishops and archbishops and even the Pope. So yeah, is that what you were asking, Jacob?
Yep, that's right. What was the Gaffcon conference? What was that about?
So Gaffcon is a movement within Anglicanism, a strongly opposed to moves within some churches to recognize the rights and place of LGBTIQ plus Christians within churches. And so I see it as one example of what I know that you're witnessing as well in the US. So I kind of throw back, it's like patriarchy once again. So patriarchy is threatened by gender differences, and it's a movement which is right across the Anglican Communion, in the US, Canada, right across the Western world, in Africa, of opposition. So the leaders of the movement are calling upon their fellow Anglicans to repent for their unbiblical attitude to gay and lesbian, transgender, and kind of both existence and place within the church. It's interesting that I'm in Sale, which is in northeastern Victoria, which is above Tasmania for your American audience, and below New South Wales, where I come from. And I've come from Melbourne, and then before that, I was in Wangaratta diocese, so in the town of Wangaratta, city of Wangaratta, and speaking to clergy. Well, within our own country, the Anglican diocese of Wangaratta voted overwhelmingly to allow for the blessing of same-sex unions, and scandalized the conservative wing of the church, of the Anglican Church in Australia, which is divided into dioceses or regions. And so there is amongst the Australian Anglican Church or diocese right across the country, Gaffcon is influential amongst many. And in an honest faith, I don't have a good word to say for Gaffcon at all. I think it's dishonest and it's damaging. And going back to the issue of hermeneutics, if your way of reading the scripture hurts people, damages people, as is the case with the subordination of women, as is the case with the non-recognition of LGBTIQ plus their existence and the importance of these people, then I see. Yeah, I don't really have a good word for the movement. It's a fellowship of conservative dioceses around the world with the major issue: sexuality, gender. Can I do a plug in this context, Jacob?
Okay, sure.
Okay. Last night, I went to the launch of a wonderful book which I'd read in draft form of a dear friend, a trans friend, Steph Fenton. And Steph has written a wonderful book, and I might just show it to you. It's called Gender Expansive Faith: How Trans Lives Are Illuminating the Divine, Transforming Feminism, and Ending Christian Patriarchy. What do you think of that for a title? But that's it. I'd recommend you getting a copy. It's a wonderful book, and the launch was fantastic.
What do you make of when you're pondering God's rescue plan? What do you mean by that?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So what does that mean? It's a critical question, and it's a question that my evangelical friends would be inclined to ask. I think, what do you make of the ministry of Jesus? What do you make of the divinity of Jesus? What do you make of the death of Jesus? The resurrection of Jesus? Those lie at the heart of Christian faith. And within an honest faith, I look at what is sort of a puzzling aspect of this whole great rescue plan, in terms of what we can know, one, about the teachings of Jesus, what we can say about the development of theology, which we see within the New Testament, climaxing in some ways in John's Gospel, and then a trajectory that's picked up by Nicaea in the 4th century, with the adoption of a Trinitarian understanding of God. One of the questions that has kind of overlaid my thinking on this for a long time is this rescue plan of God's, this display of the love and the compassion and the willingness to forgive of God. Why is it arrived so late? So you have a rescue plan, but humankind has been around for, in various forms for millions of years. Certainly within Australia, our first Australians, first peoples, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders, have been here for, say, 60,000 years. And so what that kind of, just even reflection on that has kind of had me thinking, well, is there a bigger plan? Is God's, if there is a God, and I am a theist and I do believe in God, if there is a God, kind of what was God doing for all those thousands and thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of years? And my best answer to date is that God was kind of acting in and through nature, including human nature, to encourage a quest for greater understanding. And in that quest, as it finally arrived, into Judaism, which is not much older than Christianity as a religion, you have kind of, if you like, insights, and you might say they're inspired insights around the essential dignity of humankind and of the importance of forgiveness, reconciliation, compassion, and love. So I guess I'm more likely to see a big picture view of God that isn't restricted to a particular rescue plan. That rescue plan is part of a bigger picture. Does that make any sense? Maybe ask another question, Jacob, to tease it out.
Yeah. what do you make of humble faith? And my second part to that question is, Socrates and humility. What kind of connection do you see there as well? And does that also influence the way you look at the Bible?
Yeah, it most definitely does. I think it's interesting. Just speaking generally, that humility is such the most beautiful attribute. When you see it in a sportsman, when you see it in a politician, when you see it in another person, it is so winning. And I think people might ask, where has my journey ended? It's kind of ended in a place of humility, recognizing that although this is how my faith journey has gone, it's not necessarily how yours will go. And I'll die with many, many more questions than I've had answered, you know what I mean? So humility, and that's very Socratic in a way, isn't it? Like the essential humility of a Socrates who could describe himself as, could accept the description of himself as the most humble man, was well grounded, I think, because he could say that he basically knows nothing, and relatively speaking, of course, that was true. So then you got to say, well, coming into reading and understanding the Bible, you're always a learner. I feel like you're always a learner. It doesn't mean that you don't come up with beliefs that are well founded, and it doesn't mean that you don't have knowledge, but you've always got more. And I think that's been my faith journey in terms of reading the Bible, and I think the Bible itself. That's the thing. Some people create, a kind of fossilized text, but the Bible itself is quite dynamic right from the very beginning. So it self-corrects. It looks back and says, like the writer of Ecclesiastes, this neat formulation that if you're good, God will reward you, and if you're bad, God will punish you, just doesn't work. The writer of Ecclesiastes just couldn't see that happened. And so the Bible itself, the biblical writers themselves are involved in a quest, an open-ended quest that we continue. And in that quest, humility is essential. And what last point, what kind of really disturbs me is forms of the faith that encourage people to say, we know what's right, we're telling the truth, we're Christian, you're not, you're an outsider, you're going to hell because you differ in your thoughts about God and Jesus. And that hubris is unjustified. It is totally unjustified. So in this podcast, I mean, there'll be any number of people, listening in. If I come across arrogantly in my, profession of faith, then I shouldn't. Humility is huge for me. Thanks.
We got a super chat from Fish and Ty. Thank you for the super chat. I concur. Christ taught tolerance. God bless you, sir.
Let me put my glasses on so I can read it.
Yeah, I read it to you already.
I know you did. I just, I concur. Christ taught tolerance. God bless you, sir. Oh, nice. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Fish and Ty.
Yeah.
What do you mean by liberating faith?
For me, a faith that can liberate you. What I guess, all sorts of things, right? So if your faith tells you that because the Bible is God's word and can't be contradicted, and you have an infallible interpretation of it, then you can enforce this on others. It's kind of a that kind of hubris, that kind of thinking needs to go. And so to be liberated from even that way of thinking, or in my case, in revising and in some cases discarding earlier ideas, there's a freedom that comes with that. So if I was expected to continue believing as I once did, that Adam and Eve were actual two human beings, that Noah's flood was a universal flood that covered the whole earth. Yeah, I mean, any number of things that I've come to see in a different light. It's like knowledge is, new knowledge that allows you to think differently is liberating. And I guess the other side of things is, and not so much for me, I think in some ways, I've had an easy and reasonably privileged life, but along with Steph Fenton and a number of other people, I was a co-founder of an organization called Equal Voices, which was a fellowship or a movement of LGBTIQ plus Australians and Australian Christians and their allies, with me being an ally. And I heard only just this week of another son of a clergyman who came out to his father, who totally ripped into him and rejected him, and he's taken his life. This has happened just in the last few days, and there are any number of my fellow Christians, LGBTIQ plus, who have suffered so terribly from attitudes towards them that reach all the way back, all the way through church history, and to be liberated from the prejudice and the hatred that comes to them because of who they are and because of the rejection that they have received from the church. I guess I would say that the faith that I've kind of come to is liberating for me, and it is liberating for women who are demeaned by and often abused as a result of Christian teaching that was considered Christian teaching. That's a long answer.
When you talk about hopeful faith, in what context are you talking about it when you bring up the book of Ecclesiastes?
Oh, okay. Can you remind me?
It's in page 148 when you start the chapter on hopeful faith.
Okay. Let me have a quick look. I've got my book here. Yep.
We're talking about that some are perhaps more hopeful than others, with Ecclesiastes at the more cautious end of the spectrum. But hope is plentiful throughout the Bible. That's what you say in the smaller second paragraph.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Without a doubt, Christian faith and Jewish faith that preceded it, and Christian faith sort of built upon it. Judaism in its earlier forms, biblically, in terms of its literature, kind of put a lot of its hope in what might happen for them as a nation in this world. and death was conceived of as a shadowy, wraith-like existence, near death experience, really. And so, and I understand that questions such as posed by the writer of Ecclesiastes about the fact that good and evil die at the same time, and that good doesn't guarantee that you're not going to be killed early or taken over by a foreign army, and so the book of Daniel kind of sort of picks up. It's a late written book within the Hebrew canon. Kind of picks up the idea of a full-bodied life beyond the grave, so resurrection. And so Christian faith, and I think a number of reasons for its early success was its high valuation of humankind, and that certainly can be. You can go back to the early chapters of Genesis to find a very kind of noble and ennobling view of humankind. And then of course the prospect of life beyond the grave that certainly was kind of fueled by the a belief in the resurrection of Jesus, and so Christianity has hope built into its very DNA, I would say. So raising all sorts of questions, but it's hopeful in a number of different ways, including the belief in a life after death. So, within my immediate family, our parents have passed on, family members have died, and the prospect of being reunited with them is a precious belief.
When you talk about reforming Jerusalem, in what context are you talking about that? What happened that you considered a reformation at Jerusalem?
I guess I'm arguing that Jerusalem, or Christian theology, needs some reconstruction, and maybe you could call it a reformation. And the reason for saying that, and I think I'm more convinced of the need for that now, even after writing the book, that I think Christianity is so far, not in all of its incarnations, but certainly in the circles that I've kind of walked and taught and lived in, hasn't done a particularly good job, hasn't done a good job at integrating new knowledge, including evolutionary theory. So to be able to take account of the fact that death and suffering has existed, all the way through from the very beginning of the evolutionary process right through to now. It's not because human beings sinned, or two particular individuals sinned, that the rest of the world is thrown into suffering and death. It isn't that simple. And so evolutionary theory, the other major, that we've known this for a long time, and Christian theologians have, of course, wrestled with that and have been variously accommodating of evolutionary theory. So, but in recent years, I guess one of the more major changes in our understanding is around the major redemptive event of the Old Testament, the Exodus from Egypt, and the subsequent conquest of the nations, the Canaanite nations. And so there's ever more reason than ever to see these stories as mythical, as nation creating, or nation and movement and religion informing myths. But many Christians still take those stories as literal, as having happened as described. And so, and I think we've also become, I have become increasingly aware of the role and the place of myths, legends, fables within, not just within the Old Testament, within the Jewish scriptures, but also within the New Testament. And so Richard C. Miller's kind of more broad definition of myth as including eschatological and aetiological and cosmic myths and apocalyptic myths kind of begins to tell you that what we read in the Jewish scriptures, what the Christian writers read from their Jewish scriptures, they pick up that mythology and the themes around that mythology and then project that into a future. So I think we've just not done a good job of accommodating this knowledge at all. Now, I do believe this doesn't just apply to evangelical churches or Protestant churches, but to Catholic and Orthodox. The tendency is not to have done the hard work to be able to say, well, if we do, better understand the scriptures in their ancient Near Eastern context with the literary conventions that, including the use of myths. So there's that reason, and then the other reason, of course, is that Christianity is bleeding numbers quite significantly. So here in Australia, for example, and in our recent census, less than 50% of Australians identify as Christian, even broadly. So about 49, and 39% of Australians identify as no religion. And so, and that movement away from Christianity in the West is rapid. It is so rapid. Our congregations are aging and shrinking, and that's happening in the US as well, I understand. And so, unless the church, if you like, gets up to date and becomes honest, hence my book, An Honest Faith, unless the church takes into account this knowledge in a way which allows for a more sophisticated appropriation of the biblical text, the slide away from Christian faith will continue.
And how do you go about discerning God within Jesus?
How do you go about discerning God without Jesus?
Within Jesus.
Oh, within Jesus. Okay, yeah. Well, yeah. It's interesting in terms of my own developing understanding. One of the key points in the last few years has been the discovery, really for the first time, of Celtic spirituality, which in many instances, and the ones we've encountered at least, is panentheist. So not pantheist, but panentheist, so that God is understood as both transcendent, but also immanent within the created order. So God can be discerned within nature, including human nature. And so the idea that that God is present within a human being is hardly radical on that understanding. And it's interesting, yeah. And so the idea of an incarnation, the incarnation of the Word of God, and that Jesus was the incarnate Word, in John's Gospel is the first developed instance of that in the whole New Testament. So right at the end, it comes in. It comes into the literature in the Johannine texts, including the Gospel. So, is that an insight? So if God can in some way kind of incarnate God's self into humankind, then the idea of God being present in the life of Jesus, life, death, and resurrection of Jesus, is not a hard idea. All sorts of questions, of course, still need to be wrestled with in terms of what we know about Jesus and whether or not something like the doctrine of the Trinity represents New Testament teaching or reality. Well, they're big questions and kind of beyond my ability to be able to know for sure.
And in my final question, what do you hope readers take away from this book?
Yeah, that's a good question. I am aware that if people do not want to change their beliefs at all, and are, as I said earlier, convinced that they're right and others are wrong, including me, then generally speaking, they're unlikely to read An Honest Faith or its predecessors, A Restless Faith and Faith Without Fear. But all three of the books were written with my own kind of tribe that I've grown up through in mind, evangelicals. My aim is to provide, to better inform, because I would like, my fellow Christians to be informed about the things that are in the book, and then they can do the hard work of, or they can, begin to do or seek help in doing the hard work of kind of integrating the new knowledge that I've mentioned, and hopefully come to a more inclusive, generous, and well-informed understanding, not just of the Bible, but of life and gender and sexuality included. But this book in particular is set up, as I said towards the beginning, for people who are questioning, for people who, are not happy, who have cognitive dissonance and are saying, what do I think about this? So at one of my talks, someone who was there afterwards got in touch, and she told her son, who was no longer going to church, about the talk I gave, and she asked him, if you didn't have to take the biblical stories literally, or take them all literally, would you come back to church? And he said, I would. So I guess the book is for people who are maybe no longer going to church, for those who have, pissed off, excuse the French, or distant, who have become disillusioned with the established church, but are looking for a spirituality that they can take with them into life, and are maybe asking the questions, where should I go, where should I land? The book is for people caught up in that broad faith deconstruction, reconstruction kind of movement. It is a movement at the moment.
And I have the link to purchase Keith Mascord's book in the description below and the pinned comment. And with that being said, Keith, thank you very much for joining me today.
Yeah, thank you very much, Jacob, for having me. Okay.
Hello viewers, thanks for watching this video from the History Valley YouTube channel. Please don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell. And if any of you wish to further support this channel, please consider checking out this channel's Patreon page and becoming a patron, and or donate through PayPal or through Super Chat during your live stream. Thank you.